Hello, let's have a look at how hidden Inca tours deliberately presents false information. Premiered August 17, 2022. Perplexing ancient Egyptian artifacts that academics ignore or mislabel on purpose. Really? Mislabel on purpose or ignore. Cool. This is, he also in that video in the opening promotes his new book, Lost Ancient Technology of Egypt, Volume 2. So the issue is that in Volume 1 he presented just really bad, really bad information, copy-pasting Wikipedia articles, putting a whole bunch of things out of context, just like technically false arguments on technical issues. So it's not about interpretations, or it's about technology, technical issues. What can be done? What are the material properties of certain, different things? So this is what he says. Everything you're going to see in this video could not have been done by the dynastic Egyptians. Such as the lid of this granite box. You can see the striations, which are clearly saw marks. Well, on this point, I agree. We can clearly see the striations, and they clearly are saw marks, and you can see right up to modern day the type of saw marks left. And there's no way that was a copper saw or a bronze saw with silica sand being used, because silica sand is about the same Mohs hardness as the granite itself. I've inserted Mohs because that's the relevant hardness that comes to this, and in his earlier book he talks about Mohs hardness. So it had to be a saw of a harder material, likely diamond or possibly something even more exotic than that. Okay, now go back to September 2021. He rehashes these same clips over and over. In there he says, as we all know by now, granite is not a material that could be efficiently shaped by the dynastic people. Prior to that, he had the exact same video going back the year before and year before that, where he'd say, well, it's impossible to cut the granite with a copper saw. So anyway, back to his point. So it could not have, no way it could have been done with a bronze saw or silica sand. And so it had to be a harder material, likely diamond or possibly something even more exotic. Okay, now this is just silly, because let's look at diamond. If you need a harder material to cut something, diamond sits at the very top of Mohs scale. So therefore you would need something more exotic and harder than diamond to cut diamond. So the question is, what secret material do the gem cutters of this world keep hidden from us to protect us from this mystery? How do they cut polished diamonds? They must have something even harder than diamond. Well, they don't. What they have is diamond dust. Here's the basic rule: like cuts like. If I get a piece of granite and rub it against the same piece of granite, I'm going to cut it. If I get a piece of sandstone and rub it against, I'm going to cut it. So this diamond technology stuff is just ridiculous. Now notice this little wheel. That looks very bronzish to me, because it's embedded with diamond dust. That's what does the cutting. You can just look up any gem cutting lapidary information. Tin blade for diamond saw blade. Okay, they use a tin blade and it will be embedded, or a copper or bronze lapping plate. Grinding wheels, it's embedded with diamond. It's not the tin, it's not the copper, it's not the steel, it's not the PVC or the wood that does the cutting, it's the abrasive dust. Diamond cuts diamond, granite cuts granite. This is well known. This goes back centuries and centuries in terms of recording. So it requires 3 polishing discs. The first is lead, the second is tin, the third is copper. Well, copper will cut diamond because it's not the copper, it's the diamond that does the cutting. The copper is just there to push against it. Now, a very simple question: does paper cut stone, metal, or is it the sand on the paper that does the cutting? The paper is just there to push the sand against the material. It's the sand that does the cutting, not the paper. Here's a bronze sintered diamond cutting grinding disc for glass, gem and stone. It's the abrasive embedded in there, not the bronze, that does the cutting. So you can cut granite with a copper saw just like a steel saw, because it's not the steel that cuts, it's the sand. Now, in regards to silica sand, so what is silica sand? Well, silica is another name for silicon dioxide. Most common form is quartz. When they say granite has a hardness of 7, well, you can, if you do a quick Google search, you're going to look up Mohs hardness granite or hardness of granite, and it's going to give you a number. Some will say 6 to 7, some will give us 6.5 to 7.5, some will say 6 to 8. The important thing to remember is that granite does not have a hardness. The hardness comes from the minerals which make up the granite. There are rare examples, but generally speaking, the hardest mineral of significant quantity that you're going to find in a piece of granite is silica or quartz. Granite gets its hardness from the quartz, and granite is less than 45, sometimes a little bit more, but granite, half of the granite is quartz. Yeah, okay, well, silica sand is 93%, or sometimes it can be a little bit because there are different variations of it. Sometimes some rock crystal has up to 99% silica in it. Silica sand is harder than granite on most scale because it has more silica in it. So again, you don't rate by limestone doesn't truly have a hardness, it's the minerals inside it. Granite doesn't truly have a hardness, it's the mineral. That's how they get it. Now, the lower the percentage of silica, the lower it should be on the scale. Those numbers where you just do that quick search, it gives you a range because it depends on the particular sample of granite you're dealing with. Silica sand has a higher percentage of quartz, and so strictly speaking it is harder than it. But that doesn't really matter, because what really matters is that like cuts like. If this was not true, we would not be able to cut diamond, because there is nothing harder than diamond. There are different scales of hardness, so there's like hardness if I bash something against something else, but what we're talking in terms of cutting, it's Mohs scale would be the simplest, easiest way to think about it. And another way would be sandpaper. Now, if I make sandpaper out of talcum powder, it's not going to be very good. If I make sandpaper with diamond or silicon carbide or aluminium oxide, it's going to be a very good sandpaper. Silica sand is harder than granite, or depending on the sample, exactly the same, but that doesn't matter because like cuts like. Otherwise, I would rub I'd get a piece of granite, break it in half and rub the two bits against one another, and it would never cut, it would never scratch, it would just be sliding across each other doing nothing. Brien Foerster hasn't even rubbed stones together, or he has, and well, anyway. Now, in terms of hardness as well, so natural sandstone has 70 to 95% silica or quartz in it. So in that way, sandstone is as hard or harder than granite. Now, acoustic sandstone, 60 to 70%, but it has 10 to 15% aluminium oxide. Aluminium oxide is 9 on Mohs scale. It's also called emery or corundum. Well, emery is a mix of aluminium oxide, and because it's not pure aluminium oxide, emery is slightly lower on Mohs scale than what would be a pure sample of aluminium oxide. And this is an ancient abrasive known to ancient people. They traded this widely in ancient times. So this sandstone is harder than granite. Crushed sandstone, use that as an abrasive, it's going to cut granite. Okay, now here's a while ago, lost ancient high technology PVC versus red granite. Very simple experiment. I'd done a lot of drilling with a copper tube into granite, but in this one I crushed some sandstone to use that as the abrasive. I attached a little bit of PVC to the end of my drill, and I cut granite with it, because it's not the PVC that cuts, it's not the copper, it's not the steel, it's not the sand, the paper on the sandpaper, it's the abrasive, it's the sand that does it. Crushed sandstone cuts. I'll link these in it. So copper will absolutely cut granite, and it will absolutely leave those striations, and then then the refuge of a scoundrel. Well, it takes too long. It's not feasible. It absolutely is feasible, because up to modern machine introduction, it's exactly how they did it, and they did it by hand, and it was entirely feasible for millennia before that. Well-known fact. Now we go back to Natural History, Book 36, Pliny the Elder. So what is this division, though apparently affected by the aid of iron, is in reality affected by sand. The saw acting only by pressing upon the sand. So what's he saying? And then you move the blade to and fro. It's not the iron that cuts the stone, it's the sand that cuts the stone. It's not the PVC either, it's the sand. Going back a few years, Brien used to say it's impossible to drill in granite without diamond technology. Well, he moved away that for a while. He said, well, it's not efficient. Okay, but now, as scoundrels, they revert to what they know best, selling snake oil. And so he's gone back to this. It cannot be silicas. It could not be. It could not be a bronze saw. It could not be a copper saw. Well, it absolutely could. People who work in gemstones, including diamonds, still use bronze and copper tools, but it's the sand, the diamond sand, that does the cutting. You can absolutely drill in granite with sandstone, crushed sandstone, quartz, emery, corundum, or diamond if that's available, but you absolutely don't need it. Now, this is a masonry cutting disc. It's for concrete, brick, masonry. You can get it at your hardware store. When I wanted to get my corundum, my aluminium oxide, for some of those experiments, I bought some of these, and I broke, rather than send away and get an expensive sample, you can get a disc like this, break it up, and so it's just aluminium oxide that's glued together, and then there's this mesh which puts it together. The mesh doesn't cut. When you have a cutting disc like this on an angle grinder, it's the sand that does the cutting. This is long established, proven fact that anyone slightly interested in stonework should absolutely know, and especially after more than a decade that Brien Foerster's been selling this garbage of his. He does not want to know this. Now, either Brien Foerster is utterly incompetent and lazy. Okay, that's the generous way to look at it, or he is a deliberate snake oil merchant, because he is familiar with this. This is why these people, why they run and hide and won't go into any debate, won't address comments, even when people leave. I started off leaving polite comments with this guy, and the first thing he did was shadow ban me for leaving a polite comment. So that's why it's pointless actually to do this, because they're not interested in it. They censor. So just like Brien says, academics ignore or mislabel. Well, it's the old, was it Goebbels who said it? Accuse the opposition of what you do yourself. That's what the snake oil merchants would get. They'd sell their snake oil and they'd go, the doctors are hiding this miracle cure from you, but I'm going to tell you the truth and I'm going to sell it to you cheap. That's how they work. That's a standard operating procedure for scoundrels, frauds, and snake oil merchants. Hidden Inca Tours presents a great way to separate good people from their hard-earned money and to put it into the pockets of the likes of Brien Foerster. Now we go back to, is he incompetent and lazy? Again, that's the charitable way, but you can't really know. I can't see into his mind. I don't know that he doesn't have a deliberate delusion on this part, some sort of impairment. But in the case of, for instance, Christopher Dunn, you can prove that he faked an experiment, and then that puts into doubt his analysis, terrible analysis of precision and symmetry. But you watch the pattern of these people and again how they work, they can't help themselves, because if they were to take one backward step, if I were to offer one correction, then the house of cards that they've built starts to collapse. And that's why why they'll never show themselves doing an experiment, why they'll never address the experiments that have been done, why they'll never actually look into the well-known, accepted industry facts that are just the world is based upon. What they're really arguing is, they might as well be arguing that wheels don't roll, because this is how well established these things are. It's not even for debate. It's like so well established. And so what can you say now? If you're unsatisfied, very cheaply, very quickly, you could do an experiment, get a piece of copper and some sandstone and rub them. You don't have to cut through 8 meters of it. You just have to do it long enough to see that it does cut. Then look at the old timers who used to cut by hand. Is the whole world lost ancient high technology? If you go, the 16, 17, 1800s before machines come in, and diamond abrasives were cheaply available. How did the world work back then? If it's not utter incompetence and laziness, it has to be a deliberate fraud on their part. And then you look at the standard operating procedure of the scoundrel, accuse the others. Look, these people are lying to you, and since I'm telling you that they're lying, therefore I must be the truth. And then they'll also, standard procedure is present a fact or a fake fact, such as, well, you can't do it, therefore it's impossible. And then once they've got you with that, once they've got you doubting that, then they can introduce all of this other poetic, well, it can't be done, therefore it must be lost ancient high technology. By the way, something cataclysm, something Zoe Hawass was mean to me, or something. This is the standard grift. This is an age-old grift. If you haven't seen the movie, what was it with Robert Redford and Paul Newman? Great movie, now I forget the name of it. It was all about con men, but you see how they operate. They get you to doubt, and then they get you to trust, and then they've got you on the hook. And that's what this is. Brien Foerster intentionally ignores or mislabels facts on purpose, and his hidden Inca tours is nothing but a business to separate decent people from their money and to line his own pockets. Or he's incredibly lazy and incompetent. That's the best you can say about him.